Finally, he regained the courage to meet your gaze, and you blinded him with a smile brighter than the sun itself.
This alpha will be the death of me.
You count, little angel. Armin smiled back automatically and nodded. Still mute, apparently. He watched you run off and eyed his quiet surroundings, figuring you had tracked down the others once already, and were letting him take his turn. 1, 2... Eventually he made it to 30 and called out loudly, "The hunt begins!" It was time to execute his plan.
Okay, so I'm sure I must be extremely weak in comparison to her. I hear alphas are unusually durable, so it'll probably take all the strength I have just to knock her over.
His insides dropped at the thought. Tackling an alpha? He must be crazy!
No. This is what she's asking for. Alphas know what they want at all times. And they get it. Always.
Armin decided to go primarily by smell too. It's not as if he had any desire to pin Marco or Bertolt to the ground. He made a face at the mere idea, before focusing on quietly sniffing the air when the wind settled. He didn't have an alpha's heightened senses, but it seemed to do the trick. Your lovely scent caught his nostrils, and he couldn't help but indulge himself in a slow inhale, before deducing your position from there. His lips turned downward when he realized. A little open area rested between the top of the arbor and massive potted spruce on the upper patio. That's where you were. It was certainly not an ideal spot. Being thrown onto the stone terrace would hurt you, wouldn't it? He crept up the steps, contemplating.
I could pin her shoulders to the railing,
Armin thought.
Yeah, that would work.
The banister was easily wide enough for that. He'd laid out on it long ways many times in the past, enjoying a book to the sound of singing birds.
That would be a much shorter fall than to the ground, so it won't hurt her.
He smiled to himself, inching up on the tree.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Got you, Alpha! The blonde sprung out of hiding, catching you by surprise. You instantly turned and opened your arms to catch him, expecting a similar dominance attempt to Marco's. Unfortunately, you hadn't predicted the sheer magnitude of Armin's force, and had no time to secure your footing. Mid-air, the Omega was careening towards you, locked into his leap. You stepped back to slow his momentum, as his dive-like positioning would have easily led to him smashing that pretty face of his onto the stone overhang had you chosen not to intervene. His arms slipped past your shoulders, and his chest collided with yours, and now you were toppling backwards. Your feet flipped up above your head, and the sudden influence of gravity made your stomach drop.
Ah! No! Ah!
In a sheer rush of instinct, you clutched him as close to your breast as possible, taking care to cradle his head from injury. One loud crash of buckling wood and a thud later, and you found yourself flat on your back on the grass. Armin immediately rolled off of you, and your brain caught up on the events that just unfolded. Not terribly far above your head, but still a fair distance, was the ledge you fell from. The crash you heard was the combined weight of your bodies obliterating the top beams of the garden's white arbor. A massacre of torn vines and smashed white magnolias lay around and beneath you, and a few of them were turning red somehow. Oh! It was now you noticed the bold little angel spewing out apologies and fussing over your injuries. You hadn't heard him at first. Apparently the fall had knocked you senseless a tiny bit.
Are you okay, Alpha? Oh no. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
You sat up and looked him over. At least from what you could see, he appeared to be unharmed. You aren't hurt, are you, sweetie?
No. But you are.
His hand shook as he cradled one of your arms, which were both scraped to pieces from the rough, aged wood. His face twisted in horrified remorse, and his eyes began brimming with guilty tears. Wow. The empathy was strong with these creatures.
Marco! Bertolt!
He screamed out helplessly. But they were already running in your direction. Marco arrived first, seeing the blood and turning pale.
I'll go get the matron!
Marco was out of sight before you could object. This was honestly nothing to you. You had literally dropped from the very top of a tree playing this game once. And missed your target. So it was definitely a culture shock for you to be doted on so much for such a small level of bodily harm. This would definitely be considered a walk-it-off level threat to most alphas.
That doesn't hurt, does it?
Your attention was brought back to Armin putting pressure on one of your bleeding arms. His quivering lips were pressed into a line, eyes almost pleading as he watched for signs of your discomfort. He looked terrified, repentant, despondent. Every expression you didn't want to see on his precious face. You reached up to caress his cheek, vibration of your croon starting immediately.
No, What have you done?
Bertolt finally reached your side, countenance aghast as his eyes flickered between concern for you and accusation at Armin.
It was an accident,
Armin stuttered out.
I didn't mean to.
Go get the first aid kit and bring it to the parlor.
But
Go now! You blinked in surprise at Bertolt's stern tone. But it certainly didn't startle you as much as your abrupt crooning had. There had to be affection present for an alpha to croon. Bertolt had interrupted so quickly that Armin hadn't noticed it. But you noticed it. Had it just been your instincts rising up? The need to comfort a crying Omega? Or was there something more brewing between you and the darling blonde? You were so mentally focused on the matter that you hadn't noticed the smothering young man lifting you into a bridal carry and taking long strides toward the back doors.
I assure you this isn't necessary.
You curled your arms into your chest out of courtesy.
I didn't get any blood on your shirt, did I?
That's not something you need to worry about, Alpha.
She protected me as we fell.
Armin frowned to himself, sorting through the first aid kit with Marco to find the proper tools. His heart ached at the thought, and throbbed alongside the swelling in his left knee. It had hit the ground at an awkward angle, enough to make it sore for a day or two, but he easily could have broken his skull from a fall like that, if you had dodged instead of embracing his tackle. It's okay, Armin. Marco's voice yanked him violently out of his spiraling thoughts. He was giving him a sympathetic look as he washed his hands in the water bowl he'd brought along. It must have been because of how downtrodden he looked. I'm sure she knows it was just an accident. Armin nodded slowly, then emotionally banished his placating words.
Where's the matron?
He glanced up, expecting her to come sweeping through the doorway at any moment. I couldn't find her. I think she might have gone into town.
I see.
It was now he caught sight of Bertolt coming up the patio steps and rushed to open the door for him. He tried to shove down the ugly flare of jealousy at the fact that he was cradling you in his arms. Did you get any water? Antiseptic? Right here! Marco grabbed the supplies and stood at the ready, as you were slowly placed onto a burgundy leather chaise. It was an ideal seat at a time like this, having no arms or sides to hinder their medical pursuits. You eyed the tallest Omega pensively. That fact must have been on his mind when he ordered Armin to meet him here. It appeared Bertolt really was as thoughtful as the matron had said.
What else was she right about?
Marco arrived at your left, and Armin at your right next to Bertolt, who loomed over him, watching his movements as if waiting for him to make a mistake. It briefly made you wonder if Omegas had hierarchies like you did, or if Bertolt was just an even bigger worrywart than Armin, whose hands were trembling as they wet the gauze with alcohol.
This might sting a little, Alpha. I'm sorry.
It was clear he was apologizing for more than just the mild impending burn. Marco mirrored his actions as he cleaned the cut, moving at a swifter pace. His hands were more secure, confident in their hold and abilities, whereas Armin's were almost painfully careful.
It's deeper than I originally thought,
he mumbled with a grimace as he stared at the angry red gash. He was certain his chances were shot now. Even if the best were to happen, and you forgave him. Any alpha with a lick of intelligence would know better than to take a reckless Omega for a mate. And after last night, he knew you were anything but ignorant. His face twisted in regret, wetness glossing his baby blue eyes once more.
I shouldn't have been so careless.
Even Bertolt's serious expression softened at Armin's contrition.
Don't fret so much, little angel. I'm quite all right.
By now, Marco had finished tying off the dressing on your other arm, and you moved it to rest atop the blonde's head.
Really?
Now Armin felt guilty for another reason. You were the one in pain, not him. Yet here you were comforting him. However, you had to admit your efforts weren't entirely in vain. His dour mood actually did perk up at the easygoing expression you wore, combined with your gentle hand patting his head. He was glad he was kneeling so you were able to do that. Wait, why was he upset again? Oh, right. His idiocy nearly killed the alpha of his dreams. At last he finished his careful task, twirling the white rolled bandage from your elbow to your wrist. It felt like a crime, being forced to cover up so much of your beautiful skin. Armin, Bertolt spoke up. Why don't you bring our guest a fresh change of clothes? Armin didn't want to leave your side, but Bertolt's words were a clear dismissal, surely to gain a chance to apologize for his abhorrent behavior, and explain that it wasn't an accurate demonstration of what the establishment had to offer. Armin nodded silently, casting you one last look of heartache or longing. You weren't sure which, before taking his leave. Can I get you anything, Alpha? Marco asked. Something to drink? Maybe painkillers? But his questions fell on deaf ears. You were busy watching the petite blonde's back as he rounded the corner. He was a little bit different from the other two, wasn't he? And somehow these recent events called to light a moment from your past. A local department store in your hometown had a toy section, one you frequented as a child. And one day you noticed something out of place on the shelf. A handmade doll rested in between two commercially manufactured ones. The wear and faults in it were more apparent, but it also beheld a depth from the love and effort that went into its design. It was less polished, less pristine, yet somehow more coveted in the long run. What that Omega did back there showed tenacity, dedication. He just had a momentary lapse in judgment, which could be easily forgiven. You traced the bandages on your right arm, unable to fight the pleased smirk that was now lifting up your features.
That was a good pounce.
To be continued.